The pasta sauce aisle may be one of the most misleading places in your supermarket. Many jars sitting there today contain very little real tomato. And the surprising part, some still sell for $10 a jar. Each one promises a taste of Italy. Each label shows ripe tomatoes, warm kitchens, and old-world cooking. But turn the jar around and read the ingredients, and a very different story begins. Modified food starch, added sugar, soybean oil, and a phrase called natural flavor that may tell you very little. Today, we are looking at 5 brands you may want to place right back on the shelf. Counting down to the worst one of all, a sauce that has been America's #1 for more than 40 years while using ingredients meant to imitate what real tomatoes should naturally provide. Then we will show you 5 brands that actually use real tomatoes inside. Every fact in this video comes straight from the ingredient label. Let's get into it. At number 5 is Bertolli tomato and basil. This is the jar designed to feel like a higher-end Italian import. Bertolli has shaped its whole image around one idea: Italy. The name, the polished label, the lettering, and most of all, olive oil. In this sauce, olive oil is not presented as just another ingredient. It is part of the sales message. It is what Bertolli wants you to think, makes this jar different from the cheaper sauces lined up beside it. The suggestion is simple. This is the sauce made with real olive oil, close to the way someone in Italy might make it when quality matters. Then you turn the jar around. Bertolli, tomato, and basil is made in the United States. It is not imported, and the olive oil used as the main trust signal for the brand appears in such a small amount that it adds almost nothing to the real taste of the sauce. What you are tasting is not olive oil. You are tasting a sauce that includes olive oil somewhere on the ingredient list. Those two things are very different. And that difference is exactly what the front of the jar quietly softens. Modified cornstarch shows up among the first 8 ingredients. That matters because it helps explain the texture. Modified cornstarch is a processed thickener. It is used here because the tomato base by itself does not have enough weight to feel like a full, real sauce. The thickness that should come from gently cooking good tomatoes down, bringing out their natural sweetness, deepening the flavor, and building body over time, is being created with a starch additive before the jar ever reaches the shelf. That leaves a light, starchy feel in your mouth after each spoonful. And the olive oil named on the label cannot cover that up. The sweetness gives away another clue. This sauce tastes sweet, in a way that ripe tomatoes usually do not, unless they were grown well and picked at the right time. That's smooth. Ordinary sweetness is what happens when the tomato base feels thin and the recipe needs something else to make it seem finished. At around $5 to $6, you are paying more for a sweetened sauce supported by starch, dressed up in Italian-style branding. The label is doing work that the sauce itself is not doing. The next brand does not even work very hard to appear premium, and in a strange way, that makes it feel even more disappointing. At number 4 is Hunt's traditional pasta sauce. This is the low-cost jar that does not dress itself up as something more expensive. Hunt's is priced under $2. It tastes like a sauce priced under $2. And unlike many brands on this avoid list, it is not working hard to make you believe anything different. There is no Italian countryside on the front, no borrowed family tradition, and no premium image being pushed. Hunt's is the plain budget choice. And that would be a fair place to be if the sauce inside were truly worth using for dinner. The flavor sits somewhere near tomato, without fully arriving there. It gives you the general idea of the category: sharp, lightly savory, a little sweet. But none of it comes through with much confidence. There is no richness and no real build. It tastes as if someone remembered tomato sauce in a very basic way, and then a factory made that memory into a product. The more carefully you taste it, the more that flat quality stands out. The texture is where it really falls short. It does not hold onto the pasta. It does not cover it well. You mix it into the noodles, and in less than a minute, most of the sauce has slipped down into the bottom of the bowl. A pasta sauce that cannot remain on the pasta is missing its most basic job. That is not just a matter of personal taste. It points to a weakness in how the product is built. There is one detail that deserves credit, and it does matter. The ingredient list is shorter than many sauces in this price range: tomatoes, tomato puree, salt, sugar, and spices. There is no modified starch, no added oil, and no emulsifiers. When it comes to extra additives, that is honestly more controlled than some jars selling for 3 times the price. The simple formula is real, but sugar is still included. And when sugar appears in tomato sauce, it usually sends the same message. The tomatoes did not bring enough natural sweetness by themselves. So sweetness was added later to fill in what was missing. The word spices is too broad to tell you much of anything. The sodium is around 550 milligrams per half cup serving, and that can climb fast when you use enough sauce for a full plate of pasta. Hunt's is the clearest weak performer on this list. It is not really fooling you about what it is. It simply does not give you enough reason to cook with it when better jars are only a few dollars more. The next brand asks for about 3 times the price while giving you almost the same eating experience in a much more convincing package. At number 3 is Classico Tomato and Basil. This is the one that makes you pay for the jar. Classico usually costs $5 to $7, and it comes in glass. That glass container is carrying more of the message than the sauce inside. The name suggests something traditional and carefully made. The polished label makes it feel like a small upgrade. The kind of sauce you grab when you want dinner to seem a little more thoughtful, even if you do not stop to read the ingredient list. Classico knows that shopper very well, and the product is built for that moment. The packaging does the selling, so the sauce itself does not have to do much. When you open it, the texture is so smooth that it loses almost all personality. There are no pieces of tomato, no natural variation, and no sign that this began as a vegetable with shape, texture, and character. It has been processed into an even, controlled smoothness, the kind of texture you get when large-scale consistency matters more than flavor from a real ingredient. Nothing about it suggests a tomato was ever uneven, seedy, pulpy, or naturally imperfect. The basil shows up the way a scented candle shows up. It is technically there, faintly noticeable, but it does very little for the flavor of the food you are about to serve. The ingredient detail that says the most is this. Classico lists both citric acid and natural flavor along with the tomatoes. Tomatoes already have natural acidity. That is one of the main things that defines them as an ingredient. When a tomato sauce needs citric acid added separately, it tells you the tomatoes in the recipe were not bringing enough natural acidity to create a balanced taste on their own. That bright edge had to be created and added later. That is a tomato quality issue presented as a recipe decision. Natural flavor is the food industry's broad label for keeping details out of view. It can cover many different compounds used to create a certain taste or smell. And companies do not have to tell you exactly what those compounds are. In a sauce that is supposed to taste like tomatoes, natural flavor suggests the tomatoes by themselves were not doing enough. Something else had to step in to make the sauce taste the way people expect it to taste. It has 450 milligrams of sodium per half cup. It costs $5 to $7 a jar. The glass container did the convincing, while the sauce inside did not have to carry the promise. The next 2 brands charge similar money and ask you to trust them even more. And once you look at the ingredient list, that trust starts to weaken. 3 are down, and 2 more remain on the avoid list. After that, we move into the 5 sauces that are actually worth buying. The best one may honestly change how you shop this aisle. At number 2 is Ragu Old World Style Traditional. This is the jar many families have relied on for generations. Old World Style Traditional is one of the boldest pieces of marketing on this list. It suggests care, patience, and a recipe with real roots. Created by someone who understood sauce, then protected closely enough to be made on a huge scale without losing the reason it mattered in the first place. Then read what is actually on the ingredient list. Tomato puree, water, soybean oil, salt, sugar, dehydrated onions, citric acid, spice, and natural flavor. The soybean oil is the clue. Oil does not belong in pasta sauce. It is used here for one clear purpose. The mix of tomato and water is not strong enough by itself to feel like a proper sauce. Without added oil to give it body, the sauce would be too thin to work as something most people would want on pasta. So rather than using better tomatoes that could stand on their own, this recipe brings in soybean oil to imitate a richness the tomato base does not truly have. What you are eating is seasoned tomato water held together with oil, shaped to smell and appear like something Italian. The flavor tells the same story. At first, you get a quick hit of something close to tomato. Sharp and strong for about 3 seconds, and then it disappears. There is no middle flavor, no lasting finish, only salt and the faint reminder of something that briefly seemed like sauce. The texture moves between watery and oddly heavy in a way that does not come from natural tomato pieces. It comes from a formula trying to make different thickening effects work together, and not doing it very well. It has 600 milligrams of sodium per half cup. Sugar is added. The onions are dehydrated instead of fresh. At $2 to $3 a jar, it can look like a real bargain until you realize the value is mostly in the familiar label, not in what that label is covering. Ragu has stayed on shelves because of price and visibility. It is in almost every supermarket. It is usually one of the cheapest options people can easily spot in the pasta sauce aisle. And the brand is counting on you, not stopping long enough to wonder why a sauce with this many ingredients still tastes like so little. The next brand has used that same approach for even longer, on a much bigger scale, with far more confidence. And by a wide margin, it is the most purchased pasta sauce in America. At number 1 is Prego Traditional. This is the jar that has likely been around since before you started making your own grocery choices. Prego came out in 1981. For more than 40 years, it has sat on the same shelves in nearly every grocery store across America. That kind of presence does not always mean a product is outstanding. It often means the product became the default. And once a default settles into people's habits, it becomes very hard to move. Most shoppers do not really choose Prego. They simply grab it. It is the same way you reach for something that has been sitting in the same place in the edge of your vision for most of your adult life. During all those years, Prego has mastered one very specific thing, tasting mild enough that you rarely feel a strong reason to stop buying it. That is not praise. That is a carefully built business result. The flavor is designed to register as tomato sauce without creating enough dislike to make the average shopper switch. It does not taste especially bad. It does not taste especially good either. It tastes like the widest possible version of pasta sauce, acidic enough to seem familiar, sweet enough to avoid sharpness, and smooth enough to keep anyone from being surprised. This is a flavor built to reduce complaint, not to create real satisfaction. The sweetness is what hits first, and it is not the sweetness of a ripe tomato grown well. Added sugar shows up near the top of the ingredient list. In pasta sauce, sugar is not just a flavor choice. It is a fix. It tells you the tomatoes in this recipe were not naturally sweet enough to make the sauce feel balanced on their own. So sweetness is added during production to cover the gap the main ingredient could not fill. Here is the number that changes how this jar looks. A half cup serving, about 4 tablespoons of sauce, contains 650 milligrams of sodium. That is 28% of the recommended daily intake in just 4 tablespoons. Anyone who has made pasta at home knows 4 tablespoons barely covers a small part of 1 serving. A more realistic amount for 1 plate is closer to 1 cup or even a cup and a half. Now apply that to the sodium number and think about how often this jar is opened in a home where it is used regularly. The ingredient list starts with tomato puree, which is technically acceptable. Tomato puree is tomatoes and water, but within the next several ingredients, you find modified food starch, sugar, and natural flavor. Modified food starch is there to make the sauce feel thicker and fuller than the tomato base could feel by itself. Natural flavor is there because the tomatoes were not bringing enough flavor for the sauce to taste convincingly like what it is supposed to be. These are not minor background ingredients. They help hold the whole product together. Take them away, and what remains is not the kind of sauce that could sell at this scale. Prego is on every shelf in every store because it became the automatic choice before many shoppers ever had a reason to question it. The whole business depends on that moment. Dinner is 12 minutes away, the label looks familiar, and the cart keeps moving. But the moment you turn the jar around and read it closely, the 40-year story starts to feel very different from the one on the front. This is the most purchased pasta sauce in America. That tells you much more about how grocery shopping habits work than it tells you about how this sauce actually tastes. Now that you know which jars to leave behind, here is what to pick up instead. These 5 brands face the same ingredient choices, the same cost pressure, and the same crowded shelf space, but they made very different decisions. You can see those decisions first on the ingredient label. Then you taste them right away on the plate. Best option number 3 is Muir Glen Organic Tomato Basil. This is the clean middle price choice that shows the $5 range does not have to mean settling. Muir Glen grows its tomatoes in California's Sacramento Valley. That is the main promise. No borrowed Italian story. No made-up family legend. No little village scene printed on the jar. Just tomatoes from a clearly named place, grown with organic farming practices, and made without using chemistry to force them into tasting like something they are not. The texture is the first thing that feels different, and the difference matters right away. You can see pieces of tomato, little chunks that show a real vegetable was part of the sauce and was not blended into complete sameness. A little natural variation in texture is what happens when the main ingredient is not overprocessed. It moves and feels like food made from real ingredients, which may sound like a simple standard until you compare it with the avoid list and see how often that standard is missed. The basil tastes herbal, noticeable, and blended into the sauce instead of simply placed on top of it. It acts the way basil should when it has truly been part of the recipe from the start, not dried and added late, just so the label can mention it. The full ingredient list is organic tomatoes, organic tomato puree, organic extra virgin olive oil, organic onion, sea salt, organic garlic, organic basil, organic black pepper, and citric acid. 9 ingredients. Nearly every one is easy to recognize as real food, except citric acid, which in this case is being used for preservation in a jarred sauce. That is a common and reasonable use. Most importantly, it is not being used here to create a sharp flavor that the tomatoes failed to bring on their own. That difference separates this use of citric acid from what appeared in the Classico formula. It has 310 milligrams of sodium per half cup. That is lower than anything on the avoid list and strong enough to compete with the rest of the better choices. It cost about $5 to $7. That is the same general price range as Classico and Bertolli. Same shelf price. Very different contents and very different thinking behind the ingredient list. The difference is not about the packaging. It comes from what was put into the jar. The next sauce shows what happens when that same cleaner approach is taken even further. If this breakdown has been helpful, and if you recognized a jar from the avoid list that you have been buying without noticing what was inside, a quick like helps this kind of label investigation reach more people. It takes 1 second. Best option number 2 is Rao's Homemade Marinara. This is the sauce that changed what people expected jarred pasta sauce could be. Rao's gets mentioned everywhere. And for once in the jarred sauce aisle, the attention matches what is actually in the jar. This is not a brand that became popular only because of loud advertising or being placed in every store. People started talking about it because they opened the jar, tasted it, and could tell right away that it was different from the other sauces on the shelf. The ingredient list explains why. This sauce tastes cooked, not manufactured. It does not taste like separate parts mixed together and adjusted just to survive on a shelf. It tastes like a sauce made through real cooking, with visible signs of the choices made along the way. The texture is loose and honestly uneven. Olive oil rises on the surface. Tomato pieces are not all the same size. Herbs can be seen. It does not keep one perfectly smooth shape because nothing was done to force it into sameness. A real sauce from a real kitchen does not leave the pot looking like it came from a mold. Rao's does not either. The flavor moves from one stage to the next. That one quality, more than almost anything else, separates this sauce from the jars in the avoid section. Most jarred sauces give you one strong first note, often sweetness, and then fade away. Rao's builds as you taste it. There is a beginning, a middle, and a finish worth noticing because the tomato base is strong enough to carry the experience without additives, holding everything up underneath. The ingredient list is Italian plum tomatoes, olive oil, onions, nucelt, garlic, basil, black pepper, and oregano. 8 ingredients with no added sugar, no starch, no citric acid, no natural flavor, no soybean oil, and nothing modified. For a sauce sitting in a jar at room temperature on a grocery shelf, that list is close to remarkable. The reason it can work comes back to the tomatoes. Rao's uses San Marzano-style Italian plum tomatoes. A type with less water and more natural sweetness than many standard commercial tomato varieties. Because the tomatoes already have natural sweetness, added sugar is not needed because they bring their own acidity. Citric acid is not needed because they have real depth of flavor. Natural flavor does not have to be added to make up for what is missing. When the main ingredient is truly strong, the list of additives becomes unnecessary. That is the cleanest and most direct example of this video's main point, shown on one ingredient label. It costs about $8 a jar. That is a real price for pasta sauce, and many shoppers pause when they see it. What you are paying for is the quality of the tomatoes and the choice not to work around them with shortcuts. The next option is the only one on this list that takes the same basic idea even further, and it asks one specific thing more from you in the kitchen. Best option number one is Cento San Marzano organic crushed tomatoes. This is the choice that wins by staying almost completely simple. What separates Cento San Marzano organic crushed tomatoes from every other product in this video is this: it is not a ready-made sauce. It does not try to be a ready-made sauce. And that is exactly why it takes the top spot. These are crushed San Marzano tomatoes from the Agro Sarnese Nocerino area of Italy, a specific growing region with volcanic soil near Mount Vesuvius, where minerals, drainage, and the local climate help create tomatoes that are naturally sweeter, less acidic, and more complex in flavor than nearly any standard commercial tomato grown elsewhere. That is not just a pretty claim printed on a label. It is the agricultural reason San Marzano tomatoes have been trusted for generations in Italian cooking and in serious restaurant kitchens around the world. Open the can, and the difference shows up before you even taste it. The liquid is bright, clear red, not the dull, cloudy color that comes from tomatoes that have been overworked, watered down, or blended until they lose their identity. The flesh is still there. The seeds are still there. The tomato looks like a tomato that was picked, crushed, and canned, because that is basically what happened without much interference in between. The flavor is clean in a way that may take a moment to recognize if you have been eating jarred sauces for years. It is not softened with added sugar. It is not sharpened with added citric acid. It is not supported by natural flavor compounds. It tastes like a truly good tomato because that is what it is. And that is all it is trying to be. The full ingredient list is organic San Marzano whole peeled tomatoes, organic tomato juice, and sea salt. 3 ingredients. The basil version adds 1 more. That is the whole label. No starch, no sugar, no citric acid, no natural flavor, no added oil used to imitate richness. The tomatoes do not have nothing in the can that does not belong there. About $5 for a 28-ounce can. Around 260 milligrams of sodium per half cup. The lowest number in this entire video across both lists. There is one more detail that separates this can from every other claim in the pasta sauce aisle DOP certification. Denominazione di origine protetta, which means protected designation of origin. That is not a marketing phrase. It is a legal classification enforced by the Italian government, requiring outside verification that the tomatoes come from that exact region and meet specific written production standards. If those standards are not followed, the certification is taken away. The label has to change. That kind of outside accountability, the kind with real consequences, does not appear anywhere else in this comparison. The honest trade-off is simple and should be said clearly. This is not something you open and pour straight onto pasta. You will finish the sauce yourself. Garlic and olive oil go into a pan. The crushed tomatoes are added. The sauce simmers for 20 minutes, and the seasoning is adjusted as it cooks down. That takes more effort than opening a jar and pouring. What you end up with is a pasta sauce you controlled from the very beginning, built on a 3-ingredient base, made with tomatoes grown in one of the best places on earth for growing them. With an ingredient list you could read out loud in under 10 seconds. Cento is number 1, not because it does all the work for you. It is number 1 because it gives you the strongest possible starting point, then gets completely out of the way. Here is what this whole investigation really comes down to. The pasta sauce aisle is built around one goal: keeping you from reading the back of the jar before it lands in your cart. Every choice on the front of the bottle, the colors, the names, the images, and words like homemade, traditional, old world, and vine-ripened is meant to create just enough trust that you never check the ingredient panel. You feel as if you already know what is inside. That feeling is the product. That strategy has worked for decades, across hundreds of millions of purchases, for every brand in the avoid section. The brands on that list, Bertolli, Hunt's, Classico, Ragu, and Prego, are not on every shelf because they make a better sauce. They are there because they arrived early, stayed familiar. And the distance between what the front label promises and what the ingredient list actually shows has rarely been made clear at the moment people buy. At the register, the familiar jar usually wins. The brands on the better list, Muir Glen, Rouse, and Cento, are not using some complicated method that ordinary shoppers cannot understand. They are starting with better tomatoes and leaving out the ingredients that are usually added when tomatoes cannot carry the sauce on their own. The ingredient list becomes shorter not because important parts were removed, but because there is honestly less that needs to be added. When the main ingredient is doing its work properly, you do not need starch to imitate thickness, sugar to imitate sweetness, oil to imitate richness, or natural flavor to imitate depth. The tomato does the work by itself. When the ingredient list becomes shorter, the food begins to taste more like what it really is. That is the story of this entire aisle. In one simple idea, from now on, there is one habit to use. Every time you shop in that section, turn the jar around before it goes into your cart. Not the front label, not the calories first. The ingredient list, if sugar appears among the first 5 ingredients. The tomatoes did not bring enough natural sweetness on their own. If the word modified appears next to anything, an industrial process is helping build the texture that a better tomato would have made unnecessary. If natural flavor shows up in a product that is supposed to taste like tomatoes, then the tomatoes in that recipe needed help, and the company chose not to explain what kind of help or why it was needed. You do not need to become a food scientist. You only need to read the list of things someone put into a jar and decided to sell to you as dinner.